Good day, everyone. My name is Anthony Nathaniel, and I welcome you back to Global Education Zone. Now, in this particular episode of our data processing for SS3, we are going to be dealing with a topic titled file organization. Now, file organization is kind of something that is very important in our today's world because everybody has computers. Everybody has um, personal computers, or let's just say virtually everybody has all these devices. And in these devices have storage capacities, and in these storage capacities, there are our files, kind of like the documents, the files, the folders, and all those valuable things that we decide to keep. Now, these things that we keep, they are very important to us, and because of that, we have to devote some of our processing power, some of our time to organize them into an easily accessible and structured way. And that is why we need to study file organization today. File organization is the part of data processing that deals with how you arrange the files in an order that is easily accessible, easily stored, and easily managed. Now, a file is a connection of data. It's kind of like a connection and a collection of data that is usually stored on a disk. Now, when I say disk, a disk could be your hard drive. A disk could be just your secure digital card, which is SD card. A disk could be a floppy disk. It could be a USB pen drive, and so on and so forth. It doesn't matter whatever it is, but a disk is basically any storage device, whether primary or secondary, that can store our files. Now, as a logical entity, a file enables you to divide your data into meaningful groups. So, for example, you can use one file to hold all of your company's products information, and then use another file to hold all of the company's employee or payroll information. So this is just an example of how a file helps you to partition your work. So you know that when you are doing something, you open a particular file for payroll. When you are trying to think of how to improve your product, you open another file, which is the file for the company information. Now, basically, this topic on file organization has three parts to it, and these parts to it are the types of file organization. These types of file organization, we have three which we'll be discussing in this video today. But these theory, they are actually the sequential file organization, the relative file organization, and the indexed file organization. Now, I want to talk about the sequential file organization. It is the kind of file organization whereby you have your records and they are organized in the sequence in which they were added. So, example of this is kind of like storing your files in chronological order, storing in terms of dates and time. So many of you are probably familiar with the process whereby you open an application and then you have your documents outlined in the order in which they were saved. So that is kind of like the sequential file organization. Then we have the relative file organization, and this kind of file organization, the files are stored relative to one another. Now, basically, I have a notepad in my phone, and that notebook on my personal computer or my mobile phone. It helps me store all my notes in a relative method. So what I mean is that you are able to you are allowed to make use of labels. Now, these labels, they are classified as work labels, study labels, personal labels, so on and so forth. So when I'm writing a note that is related to work or that is related to my YouTube channel, I usually categorize them as work labels. Then when I'm writing a note that is related to my school study, I categorize those others as study labels. So now this application helps me to organize them. So you have the work labels in one particular cluster, then you have the study labels in another cluster, then you have the personal labels, and so on and so forth. This is called a relative label because they are stored relative to one another. So each of those files that make up for example, the study label, they are stored relative to each other. So they are being stored and compared with each other. So they have to be compared relative before they can be clustered in such a manner. Now, a relative key is assigned to determine the order of files. So in this case, that label is kind of like the relative key. Now, you can decide to understand this topic in different ways which you want, but in my own basic understanding, I want to see the labels as keys. But when we talk about when we extrapolate this topic to other advanced areas of computer programming, like just like spreadsheets and database management system, we can call them keys. Now, these keys, they are kind of the higher ways of understanding, but these you just know that the main function of these keys are basically to assign the order of files. So the first record of a relative file organization will have a relative number of 1. Then the second will have a relative number of 2, the third 3, and so on and so forth. So they are numbered relative to each other. Then lastly, we'll talk about the index file organization method. Now, this method of file organization contains relative numbers like the employee numbers that identify the records in relation to other records. So basically, these references are called the primary keys that are unique to a particular record. Now, this is also similar to the ones of label, but you can also use this one when you want to talk about kind of like a time organization, just like an application like TimeTune. Now, so that application, you make use of this kind of you can make use of indexes. Indexes, you can see them as indexes when you say when you have already stamped on a particular type of file, and you stamp them similar to another ones, and then you can now index them together. You can make use of reference numbers for all these files, and so on and so forth. So these reference numbers, they are like representations. So instead of directly accessing your files, you make use of a reference number. So you know that when you are making use of that reference number, so maybe if my file has a reference number of 6, that means even if I don't remember the file name, once I know the 6, I will be able to retrieve that file. So I like seeing this as kind of like the search button of your Microsoft application. So when you are searching for your files, you can just type a word of that file, and then it will bring out every file that has that word. So it's kind of like that word that you typed in the search bar is kind of like an index. Now, these are 3 major file organization methods, and let's talk about the different factors to consider when choosing a file organization method. Now, when we're trying to organize our files, we have to have a purpose in mind. So you can't just sit down and organize your files based on sequential method just because you feel you had it first or because it feels cool to your ears. So basically, you have to have a meaningful reason for organizing your files in a particular method. Now, some of these reasons are the frequency of updates, the file activity, the file access method, the number of the nature of the system, and the master file medium. So I will explain this. Majorly, these means that when you talk about frequency of updates, you're talking about how often you need to update that file. So if you update a file very often, you will need to store it in a kind of organization method that makes it easier to retrieve. So each of these file organization methods, they have their different relative and retrieval speeds. We'll talk about this hopefully in a personal episode, but this is just an overview. So this course basically is meant to be an overview of this topic. Now you also have the file activity. You can store based on the file activity. Different files have different activities. So for example, a sort file is used to sort data in sequential order, and therefore sequential method has to be used to store this kind of file. Then we also have the file access method. How do you want to access your files? So do you want to be accessing your files one by one or in batches? So if you are using batches, you should probably use either an index or you should use an index method, because when you are trying to access a file, so for example, if I download batches of PDFs, so that records volumes of book, kind of like maybe I'm trying to read volumes of book on physics, and volume 1 is about mechanics, and volume 2 is about thermodynamics, volume 3 is about let's say nuclear physics, volume 4 is about quantum physics, and so on and so forth. Now these 4 volumes, they will have similar names. So if I'm trying to access them, I would use an index file method. So I can create a unique index. I can once I'm able to specify that index, it will produce every file that is related or tied to that index. So these are kind of factors that you have to consider. And then we also have the nature of the system. So for example, sometimes files that are used in a particular system will depend on the nature of the system. That is the suitable organization method for that particular system. So for example, when you are using a laptop to store your files, you basically retrieve them in a slightly different way as to compared to when you'll be storing them on your mobile phone, because your mobile phone basically has you make use of your retrieval method. You have an interface that only supports taps. For most mobile phones, you can only touch the screen because you make use of a touch screen. Now, but for laptop, you can also use the keyboard. So and you can also use the trackpad. So when you notice that okay, like it's slightly easier for you to access files by touching, so you can make use of your mobile phone, and then you can also adjust your files. So if you see if there's a file that is easier to be tracked by faster typing, you store that file on your keyboard. But if you store that on your phone, then you have to manage with the slow typing. So these are just ways. I just invented ways. I didn't reinvent the way, mind you, but I just think of ways that people might think when they are trying to store their files, kind of like the factors that affect each of the decisions you make. Now, this is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed this one. So now this is the question section. So in this question, you ask, what is file organization? So secondly, you ask to mention and explain the type of file organization. Thirdly, what are the factors to consider when choosing a file organization method? So now, if you've watched this video, you can also jump to the comment section and discuss your opinion of this point and see if you have any alternate or different perspective on this topic. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next episode.